A few months ago, back in May, I made a video about the future of super shoes, what we can expect over the next 2 to 3 years as far as trends and where super shoes are going. I'll put a link in the description if you've not watched that video. But over this past summer, there's been a couple more developments, and more specifically, Nike has really shown its hand, I think, for a few things, and more specifically around the Alphafly. Now, as a product designer, when I see product people, product representatives out there in the media talking about product releases, I listen very closely because I read between the lines as to what they're saying, and I match that up to, overall strategy that I see coming from the corporate HQ. And I do this because as a product designer, I've been on those teams that have developed these strategies, developed these messaging, and developed, the talk tracks that these people are going to do in the media. So it's always really interesting to me to hear what they're actually saying and hear what's consistent from interview to interview to interview. And with Nike specifically, there's been a few trends that I've noticed pop up a bunch this summer. But before we go there, let's just step back and review one of the biggest things that I think is really the next big battleground over the next couple of years for super shoes, and that is weight. And specifically, the shoe that really kicked that one off is this shoe, the Adidas Evo 1. This is a shoe that comes in at 139 grams or 4.9 ounces, and it really showed what you can do by reducing materials, by making things as lightweight and optimized as possible, what you can do and how far you can push a shoe to be very lightweight in the same stack heights with the same tech that we currently have in super shoes. And Adidas really is, I think, really on the edge with the Evo 1. Now, if you've ever held the Evo 1 or worn the Evo 1 on your feet, I've worn it, I'm not running it, but I've had it on my feet. It truly feels like every single part of that shoe is right on the edge of durability. It's cannot be really pushed much further without really breaking down. And I think that is something that's quite interesting because that has really pushed where that shoe can go, but it's also, I think, given a bit of a barrier. And that barrier really is you can only push foams so much before they're going to completely break down. You can only make them so light, so airy to the point where they're just going to stop working. And again, the Evo 1 feels like it's right on that boundary because you can make a one-time use shoe, which is what Adidas was saying the Evo 1 was for optimum performance, but it's been proven that people can run much more in that shoe. But for an elite athlete, you can make a shoe that is just for that race, just for that marathon, but to sell it to a consumer, unless you're going to sell it at a premium and call it like an elite or like an advanced shoe, and specifically the consumer knows what they're getting and they're buying something that is kind of a one-time use shoe for a very high fee. Again, the price of the Evo 1 is very low. Adidas is losing a ton of money. I did a whole video on the pricing, link in the description. If you're selling that to consumers, it's just not going to work. It's not going to fly. A one-time use shoe for, the price the Evo 1 is not going to work mainstream. Additionally, you can only manufacture the current foams or current PIBAs only so much, and there's a large failure rate in the current production of PIBA, at least for what Adidas was doing at the Evo 1 and the way they were producing it, that it just doesn't scale. So even if you can make that foam work, it's just not going to be something you can totally scale. And that's the other issue they were running into with the Evo 1. Over the summer, there's been a lot of buzz around Aliphatic TPU foams or ATPU foams or Aliphatic eTPU foams. Now, Puma's been the one that's been really pushing this one. They've moved all of their Nitro Elite foam to an ATPU foam. And while I don't think ATPU foams are next gen, I think they are a step in that direction. Now, TPU foams have been around with us in running for quite a long time. Nike's React and React X are TPU foams. Every brand is using some form of TPU somewhere in their shoes. It's not a new material, but the ATPU process is, I wouldn't call it new, but it's an optimization. It allows some manufacturer optimizations around how you construct the foam, the cell structure of the foam, the finish of the foam. And by doing that, you're getting a much more durable foam, but you can also really control the resiliency, the energy return of the foam. Puma's claiming that Nitro Elite, the ATPU version, has a 93% plus energy return. I think that's a couple percent higher than even Zoom X. So it's an interesting material, but it's not exactly a new material. Like I said, I don't think it's really next gen. But it has gotten a lot of traction. Li Ning and Anta, two Chinese brands, have also really heavily invested in ATPU foams. They made partnerships with one of the primary ATPU producers in China. There's also been a lot of rumors that Adidas and Asics are also going that direction in exploring the use of ATPU foams. So it is something that I think a lot of brands are looking at as a step in that next gen, but again, not quite next gen. And this is where I'm saying, like, for weight, you can only make the foam so airy. You can only reduce the weight of the upper and the outsole and all of that stuff to a certain point where you just can't remove anything else from the shoe unless you start removing foam. You remove stack height. And that's why I said that I do think we're going to see a class of super shoes that look a lot more like this shoe, the Adidas Takumi Sen 10, as far as stack height, geometry, and the size of this shoe. And that got me thinking about listening to what Nike's been talking about all summer and thinking about the future of the Alphafly, and it gets quite interesting. Nike has been talking about really four things consistently all year through all the product releases, the Alphafly 3, the track spikes that came out for the Olympics for the summer, and a few other conversations I've seen online between that. They've been very consistent with these four things. And the first one that we heard way back at the on-air event in the end of the winter is about their multi-year innovation supercycle. Now, they talked a lot about this at that on-air event in Paris, and they showed off a lot of what led to Nike being such an innovative company. I think partly this was Nike kind of putting the stamp on they are actually an innovative company. Given the past couple years, it's been a little bit of a mixed reception as what we've seen in the marketplace. And to kick that off, they debuted this shoe, the Pegasus Premium, which I did a whole video about, link in the description. Now, this shoe I think is going to not be the best running shoe, but it got a lot of headlines. It created a buzz, and it's showing that Nike is really innovating and trying different ideas. And that's exactly what they said that shoe was. It was the start of their innovation supercycle, which means that we haven't really seen anything else from this innovation supercycle. All the shoe releases that we've seen in 2024, which have been fairly minimal, and I think this explains that, are things that have been in development for a couple of years now. And they're not really part of this innovation supercycle. That Peg Premium really was. And I think in 2025, we're going to start to see the fruits of what Nike's talking about with this innovation supercycle. But that's not to say they haven't released innovative products this year. The Alphafly 3 came out. They released a suite of track spikes for the Olympics that were very innovative, plus a lot of other shoes across other disciplines. And this goes into really the next thing that Nike's really been leaning into this year, which is their emphasis on air technology. Now, I haven't seen them lean into air this heavily in a long time. And specifically, they're leaning into the Air Zoom, the tensile fiber air unit, the one that is in the Alphafly, the one that is in the Pegasus 41, not the old clear air unit that you saw in the Air Max or your Jordans way back when. It's the newer technology. It's a technology that only Nike has. Yes, Air technology has been copied and it is in other shoes, but that's that older Air Max style from the 80s, just the big bubble of air. It's very different what Nike's using now. But Nike's really leaning into it. They did multiple ad campaigns over the past few months, really emphasizing air. And a lot of their Olympic product, what threaded that together was the story of air. Now, air is a very marquee technology for Nike, and every brand wants a marquee technology. I've talked about this on the channel a bunch of times with other brands. And they want that marquee technology because it helps them stand out in the marketplace, but also from an innovation standpoint, from a performance standpoint, it gives them an advantage, or they see there's an advantage in it that no one else is going to be able to have or even get anywhere close. And I think obviously Nike sees a lot of advantage in the air technology. The Alphafly has been very successful. The MaxFly 2 and the Victory True track spikes have been very successful. They have that air technology. A lot of the leaks that we're seeing for 2025 product also have the air units, the tensile fiber air units that you see, for example, in the Nike Peg. We've seen that pop up in some other shoes. And I think Nike's going here because I think they see, again, this is something that's going to be uniquely them, but from an engineering and performance standpoint, I think they see advantages here that only they're going to be able to tap into that are better than foams. Now, if you look at the Victory 2 track spike, this is really a combination of foam and the air unit. And if anything, what really drives this shoe is the air unit. But it's a very different feel than, say, the Alphafly or any kind of road shoe. It's a track spike, so that makes sense. But I think it gives a big hint as to what the feel of air and how air will be used moving forward. Nike's been saying the words unrivaled product performance whenever they're talking about air across any implementation of air across any shoe, not just running, but everywhere else it's popping up. So they really believe in air, and I think they're putting a lot of emphasis in that to really move them into the next generation of materials, because ZoomX is a bit old now. It's not really evolving, and maybe Nike sees that they pushed it about as far as they can, but there's a lot of room left, it feels like, with the air technology, and I think that's why Nike's leaning into it so much. Another thing we've heard a lot about from Nike this year is reductive design. Now, this first popped up via Nike back in 2023 when the Vaporfly 3 was released. We heard it a little bit, but they really leaned into it with the Alphafly 3 release, and they've talked a lot about it all year in various instances. Now, in the Alphafly 3, if you've never held that shoe, you've never worn that shoe, you're going to be really surprised by just how much material is removed from that shoe. You can't really communicate in pictures. They've really removed a lot of material in that for really two reasons: to give the air unit more prominence so it can flex, but also you're getting more of the air unit feel and the resiliency from the air unit, but also to reduce the weight. And that's where I think Nike is going also in the short term, to begin to reduce weight of their shoes. And lastly, Nike's restructuring, which again, I did a whole video on this, link in the description, but it seemed very last minute, very sort of knee-jerk reaction back in the spring, but that's where they're going. Now, they've not done a big release of it, they've not done a big press thing of it, but if you look at Nike's product pages and how they're beginning to position their products and the language they're using, they are talking about standard, plus, and premium. They are talking about responsive cushioning, structured cushioning, max cushioning. They are going through that talk track already. I do think we'll see more of an emphasis on it next year in 2025, when more of these products that come out of the innovation supercycle that kind of filter into this restructuring start to come out. We'll see much more emphasis on it. And this means that everyday product lines are going to have standard, plus, and premium, but I also think that racing product lines are going to have a base and elite. Now, we've not seen that, we've not heard that anywhere from Nike, but there have been rumors that Nike's working on elite racing shoes. There was a rumor back in the spring for an Alphafly 3 Elite. I've also seen it attached to the Vaporfly 4 prototypes. It's come up in various ways. So I think Nike is, again, exploring how to tier their racing shoes as well. Now, if you take all of these things and you put them together and you look at what I think is Nike's marquee shoe right now, and that's the Alphafly 3, which, by the way, was a masterful redesign and update from the Alphafly 1 and 2. Now, I've never been a fan of the Alphafly. I've just never really liked them. I was always a Vaporfly runner, but I'm a big fan of the Alphafly 3. In fact, I did a review finally of that shoe, link in the description if you want to go check that out. But the shoe is masterful in how Nike really innovated there and updated that shoe. But the shoe comes in at 198 grams or 7 ounces. It's still about 2 ounces away from the Evo 1. And as I said, weight is the next battleground. Now, Nike has, again, as I said, stripped out about as much from the Alphafly as you possibly can, with still making it runnable. There's no dead spots in it, there's no soft spots in it, but there's so much of that shoe that's not there that it's actually pretty incredible they got it to the weight they did. And again, the weights I'm talking about are all for the standard US men's size 9 reference size that everyone uses, and it happens to be my size that I run in as well. But over the summer, in the run-up to the Olympic Games, Nike released this shoe, the Air Victory 2, one of their premier track spikes. This is their middle distance spike. In fact, I did a review of this on the channel, link in the description if you want to see that. Now, this shoe is considered the Alphafly of track spikes, and this shoe comes in at 136 grams or about 4.79 ounces, around the weight of the Evo 1. And running in this shoe makes me really, again, imagine where the future of the Alphafly could go. And that got me thinking something like this. Now, this is a bit of a Frankenstein. It's a combination of 4 shoes. By the way, let me know in the comments if you can tell which 4 shoes. Should be pretty obvious. But this got me thinking that the future of the Alphafly could look like this. Now, as I said, you can only reduce the airiness and the lightness of the foam so much, and you can only reduce so much from the shoe by making the lightweight very upper, reducing foam in the shoe before you need to start to reduce the stack height, because that's the only other thing you can do. So a lower stack Alphafly, which I think maybe for the Alphafly Elite we may see, would look something like this. And if you put this side by side with the Alphafly 3, you can see that we're only talking about 6 to 8 more or less millimeters of stack height here, but it makes a difference. And that's going to maybe be that 2-ounce difference to get into that 5-ounce range that I think all shoes are going to get to. And I think some of the more lightweight super shoes that we're going to see are going to push 4.5, even 4 ounces. We're going back to the weight of racing flats of old, probably even less. And this is why I was saying that shoes are going to start to look more like this, the Takumi Sen 10. Now, the stack height of the Takumi Sen 10 is 33.26, 7 mil drop. And my little Frankenstein Alphafly over there, that's around the same if you look at the green lines. So again, that's reducing the stack height in the shoe by, I don't know, 6, 8 millimeters or so. And that may be all it takes to get the weight down. But that looks like a very interesting shoe to me. Now, obviously that Air Zoom unit is, from a track shoe, but I think Nike can really develop that and really push where those Air units go. And again, I think they're putting a lot of emphasis on that because they know they can reduce a lot of the foam around there, not just the middle channel of the midsole, but all the foam around the Air unit to give it room to breathe, basically, but also allow that Air unit to do a lot of work in much less space. Now, the Air unit on its own probably is heavier than foam, but the amount of foam that you can actually remove by using the Air unit and the amount of resiliency you can engineer into the Air unit may make this a very viable shoe. And that's why I do think we're going to see this possibly being explored at some point over the next 2 to 3 years. My Frankenstein Alphafly is not really trying to predict the future. I'm really just trying to illustrate the concepts and the point that I'm trying to make in this video. But over the next couple of years, until we get to the next gen foams, which I don't think we'll see in the main super shoes from every brand until about 2027. And I think we'll see it in Nike and Adidas first before everyone else, because they're the ones with the biggest budget that will explore this stuff first. Puma may try to get there, but I think maybe Adidas and Nike will be the ones that actually implement it first. But regardless, until we get to that point, we're going to see a lot of exploration. We're going to see brands trying to really reduce weight. We're going to see other brands really exploring plate dynamics. We're going to see other brands exploring, different foams and maybe more stack height because, they're really leaning into that side of things and they're ignoring the weight thing. I think it's going to be a really interesting couple years in super shoes. But again, I think the Alphafly is going to be one of the ones to watch because I think the changes in the Alphafly are really going to illustrate the changes where Nike's going with this innovation supercycle, but also it's going to illustrate a lot of the innovation and thinking and emphasis that Nike's putting on their Air technology moving forward. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.